Hi everybody, welcome back to another video that I'm doing today, and today's topic is all about glutes. So I titled this video Going for Glutes. This time of year, a lot of people want to dive deeper into a lot of glute strengthening, targeting the glutes, everything that goes into it. So I wanted to kind of dive a little bit deeper into a little bit of the anatomy, education, as well as why the glutes are so important, complex type of muscle groups on the back side of the body, and why they're important overall in our exercise routine. So first off, a lot of people don't realize that there are 3 different glute muscles. And so we're going to dive a little bit deeper into why they are such a complex muscle group, because a lot of people, especially in the routines you see around the gym, they only target maybe 1 or 2 of them, but very little do you get to hit all 3 into an exercise routine. And so we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the complexity of the glutes, how to best integrate them into our exercise routine, as well as, hey, I can't get to the gym right now, or my gym might not be open. Perfectly fine. All of these routines are going to be able to do right in your own kitchen. Very, very little equipment needed. Maybe a mat or a towel on the floor. Other than that, 0 equipment needed as usual. So first off, 3 glute muscles: minimus, medius, and maximus, okay? So minimus is the smallest one, mina, meaning minuscule. And that is the first muscle we're going to cover because it's the smallest muscle. The second one, the medius, actually covers the minimus up. And so the medius is going from the iliacus, so the iliac crest, and it goes down into the greater trochanter, which is on the side of your hip, basically on your femur, your femur bone, your thigh bone. The maximus is the biggest one, and so it covers almost the entire backside of your body, and it covers the back of your sacrum and it actually leads into the IT bands on the side of the leg. And so why this is important is, if you are the type of person that's a runner or somebody that has really, really tight IT bands, a really good idea is to make sure you also stretch out that glute max muscle, which is going to be important. So opening up the hips a little bit, some cross stretches, a little bit of some sacral spinal twists, very, very gentle spinal twists. All of those are really important to have into a routine because they'll help alleviate some of that pain in the top portion of the IT band. The top portion is known as the tensor fascia lata, so the TFL. Very, very tendinous portion on the top side of your IT band. Okay, so we went over the 3 different types, and why they're so dynamic is a lot of people think, oh, I'm just going to do squats, I'm just going to do deadlifts, that's going to hit all of them. Not necessarily. So the glutes are responsible for hip abduction, so being taken away from the body. We're going to go over all this. I have a little routine I'm going to show you a little bit later. We're going to go over some exercises to hit all 3 qualities and get a nice dynamic glute exercise. So abduction, hip external rotation, so externally rotating and opening up the hips, as well as hip extension. And so why that's important is, if you're only hitting 1 or 2, you might not be getting the best benefit of all 3 glute exercises because you're not hitting all those essential muscle groups. And sometimes what you'll have is a weakness in one or a tendinopathy, and that can really affect your gait in some ways. So the thing that I'm seeing more and more common in my clinic is glute medius tendinopathy or weakness in it. And so what I'll see is my students will not be able to extend their hips, so put their hip back and to the side with a little bit of abduction. They're very, very weak, or it's painful to do that due to either a lot of engagement in the glutes, overwork type of issues, as well as just not being able to stretch and utilize that area properly, and it's being guarded. And so we're going to go over a few different things on which you're going to want to do some standing exercises. You can also utilize the standing exercises, and you can modify them into a stair routine. And I did the stair video a couple weeks back. You can definitely play around with these and make this video your own. I want to make sure to definitely emphasize that. Everything you can do here, you can modify either to a chair or some kind of stair, an elevated surface, so that way if you don't feel comfortable going down to the floor, you can absolutely bring the ground up to you. Okay, so we went over the 3 different types of glutes that we're going to go over. And the reason the glute muscles are so important is they're actually the reciprocal muscle to your hip flexors. Your hip flexors start in your spine, and they actually come forward in a V-type pattern, and they come and attach to your ASIS, which is the anterior superior iliac spine, which is in the front side of your hips. And why that's so important is your hip flexors are also known as your iliopsoas muscle. It's iliopsoas complex. And so it's made up of 2 muscle groups, your iliacus and your psoas major. And the reason these are so important is they're responsible for that hip flexion, bringing your hip up towards the body. But it's also known as, whenever I went over anatomy a few weeks back, one of the things that we're going to go over in a little bit is core, and we're going to do that a separate video for core and why core is so important. But the iliopsoas complex is actually really cool because it's actually known as the soul of the core. And it's one of the main muscle groups because it supports and holds all the tension that you hold in the lower portion of your core. And so that's really cool. And the reason that the glutes are responsible is the iliopsoas complex comes forward. The glutes are actually the reciprocal muscle group. And so what's interesting is if you notice you have really, really tight hip flexors, either you're an avid runner, a biker, or something where you're sitting for long periods of time, or you're just not getting that flexibility in your muscles that you normally would like, something that's really cool is I'm going to show you how to activate your glutes properly. If you activate your glutes while stretching your hip flexors, you can actually get a really nice, deeper, more complex stretch to your hip flexors, and it helps ease yourself into more stretches versus violently going and cranking yourself towards a stretch. So it's a nice way to kind of ease yourself into it by activating the reciprocal muscle group, which we talked about a couple weeks back in the stretching video. Okay? So a couple things we're going to go over. We went over the anatomy. We went over the education of why the glutes are so important. They're really vital in order to kind of counterbalance our core. And we're going to go over some ways that you can activate these muscles standing up as well as going on the floor. Now, like I said, you can modify these to an elevated surface or a stair or a chair type of situation. The exercises that I'm going to give you today, I actually did in a lower body loosen and lift class a couple weeks back for fitness and wellness. So I'm going to modify those as well. So if you want to, you can definitely check out that video on their site. We're going to modify this one today, like I said, standing as well as some sitting exercises. Okay, so we're going to get you over here right now. All right, so a couple things we're going to go over. Different variations of squats. So we have mini squats. Some people, whenever they see me, they're not comfortable doing full squats, either due to knee pain, back pain, something like that. We're going to show you a version of mini squats, which puts very, very little pressure on the knees as well as the core. So we're going to kind of ease you into it. Full squats. So we're going to take mini squats, go to full squats, then we're going to do single leg squats. I'm going to show you a couple of ways to do that. Also, option to use a chair as well. Stork stands. Stork stands, single leg deadlifts, a couple of different ways you can call those. We're going to go over those as well. Deadlifts, so no weighted deadlifts. Eventually, if you want to, you can add weight into these, or you can do them at your local gym, perfectly fine. I'm just going to show you the brief breakdown of how to do each of these exercises, so that way you can incorporate them into your routine, as well as you understand why they're activating the muscles and the glutes properly. And you're going to feel, when you do all these exercises, you're going to feel a little bit of differences between each of the exercises and where you actually feel it in your glutes. All right, so then we're going to go over some mini lunges. So again, not going down to a full lunge. So if we have knee issues or any type of discomfort, this puts a little less pressure on the knees for you, as well as full lunges. We're going to go over a full lunge, not a dynamic lunge where we're actually going to be doing a very, very explosive kick out lunge, but just one that's very, very basic. If you want to, you can definitely incorporate the explosive lunges into these, but for now, we're just going to stick to the bare minimum standards lunges with that. After that, we're going to break down to the mat. So we're going to come down to the mat. I'm going to go over spinal balance. Why spinal balance is important. Some people call them bird dogs, especially in a physical therapy clinic. Same exercise, but I'm going to show you how to incorporate sunbird into them. It's a yoga term, and so it's going to incorporate that hip extension, which is really nice. We're going to be going against gravity, and it's going to help work the hips just a little bit more, especially in the glutes. Then we're going to go over leg circles. We're going to talk about a little bit of abduction as well as hip extension and working the glutes in that way. Fire hydrants. So we're actually going to work on external rotation and abduction with the hips, as well as bridges, options to butterfly. So butterfly just means we're going to go up with our hips, open them up, and then drop them. It's going to be a nice, little bit more explosive version of a regular bridge. You can also do these on the stairs. I did that in the video a few weeks ago, but these ones are just going to be standard bridges. You can elevate them and you can make them a little bit harder. If you want, you can also incorporate resistance bands, all that good stuff. Okay, so let's get started here. We're going to do the standing exercises first, and then we're going to break it down to the mat, okay? So mini squats. With mini squats, I'm going to move to the side here so you can see the amount of flexion that you have in your knees. All right, so regular squats are going down to a standard 90. So going down 90 degrees, everything like that. With a mini squat, we're not going down as deep with the hip flexion because we want to minimize the amount of pressure that's being put on the anterior or the front portion of our knee. Okay? So with this, we are going to be about shoulder width apart. You can be a little bit wider if you want to. What we definitely want to avoid is a lot of external rotation of the feet. So we want to make sure our feet are nice and neutral. Otherwise, we're going to be putting a lot of pressure on the outside of our legs. Okay? So shoulder width apart with these ones. Shoulders back and down. You always want to make sure to have a nice flat back. If we're rounding ourselves forward, we're putting a lot of pressure on the lower back and the sacrum. We definitely want to avoid doing that. All right, so shoulder width apart, knees nice and bent, and the number one rule with a squat, I said this before in a couple of videos, if you can't see your toes, you're doing it wrong. So that means we're going way too far forward with our knees. We want to make sure to be sitting back, almost like we're sitting back in a chair, okay? So mini squats, going down just about a 45-degree angle is what we're looking for, just like if we were sitting back in a chair. So we're not going forward with these or leaning forward. We're sitting back and going up. All right. If we want to progress these to full squats, we can. And so we can do same positioning. We don't need to change anything like that. We're just going to go a little bit deeper into that squat. Okay. So we're actually going to a 90-degree angle, coming up, making sure we breathe with these ones. Some people really want to hold their breath. It's not very comfortable to do that because it puts a lot of pressure in your thoracic, in your thoracic spine, and it does put a lot of pressure on your vertebrae. So we want to avoid holding the breath as we're going through these exercises. Doing something like rhythmic breathing really tends to help. So if you have a breathing routine, we can even do that as a video. If somebody really wants to go over some breathing techniques, we can definitely do that as well. All right, so we went over mini squats, full squats. Now let's talk about single leg squats. So single leg, you can have a chair behind you. So I have my dog's cage here. I could definitely utilize that if I wanted to. Or you can just have the leg lifted and sit back almost like we were in a chair, okay? So I'm gonna do this with my one leg bent. Same thing, sitting back, almost as if we're sitting in that chair and going forward. All right, so what that does, you wanna make sure that you keep the hips nice and even, because if we do go out of whack, we're definitely not going to be incorporating that glute med muscle, and the hip is going to drop. What we wanna do is we wanna make sure the hips stay nice and even the entire time. The core is gonna be activated, as well as it's putting less pressure on the knees, the ankles, the hips, everything basically lower extremity wise. All right, so if you're not sure if you're keeping yourself nice and even, just check yourself out in a mirror. If you notice one hip is dipping a little bit, concentrate a little bit on more glute work, see if we can get those hips nice and even, and then you can go and incorporate the more difficult exercises at that point. All right, so now we talked about the mini squats, full squats, single leg squats. Now let's move on to stork stands or single leg deadlifts as well as regular deadlifts, okay? So stork stands. I typically tell people to start off with 0 weight with that. That way they're not concentrating on the weight, they're concentrating on the technique, which is #1 across the board. So if we were standing to the side, I have one leg lifted, so I'm lifting my right leg at this point. If I'm lifting my right leg, I'm using my left arm. So that way it's counterbalancing everything. If I was using my right arm and going down with everything, my body would shift a little bit more, put some pressure on my spine, and I don't want to do that. So whatever leg you have stationary, so in this case, my left leg is stationary, my right leg is going to go down, or my right arm is going to go down, so it counterbalances. Almost think of it like an X pattern, okay? So single leg. We want to make sure that the back stays nice and flat. Same thing we did with the squats. Back is nice and flat, shoulders are rounded back and down. That helps eliminate the pressure of everything rounding itself forward and putting a lot of pressure on the back side of the shoulders, okay? So shoulders back and down, almost as if you were squeezing your shoulder blades together. That'll make sure your back is in alignment. All right, so my right leg is down, my left arm going down, and all we're doing is we're going down and coming back up. And it's not a back action. You're actually going to feel it in your hamstrings and your hips. So what we're going to do is just dive and come up. And it's a nice rhythmic movement where nothing is moving except your hips. Okay? The nice little trick about this one is the farther you go out with your legs, if my leg was nice and straight, it's going to get me a little bit off balance. So if you want a way to make it a little bit harder on yourself, start off with bent leg and then slowly extend that leg out. And the farther you put it out, the harder it's going to be for you to balance yourself. Okay, so it's a nice little trick you can do at home. 0 equipment needed as usual. All right, regular deadlifts. So same thing that we just did, except we are going to take both legs, make sure we have a little bit of a micro bend in the knees at all times, and then we're going to go down, come up together, make sure we're breathing real good, okay? So with the deadlift, you can have an imaginary bar in front of you, perfectly fine, but we really want to emphasize that this is not a back movement. It is a hip movement. So my back is nice and straight the entire time, and that way it reduces that pressure on the vertebrae, and it has a very, very minuscule chance of harming yourself while you're doing these exercises. The main reason that people have issues during deadlifts is that they're trying to pull with their spine instead of their hips. This is definitely a hip and a glute and a hamstring exercise. So while we're doing these, again, shoulder width apart, we're going to go down and come up. And so very little pressure on the spine because the back is straight the entire time. And while we're doing these, I'm feeling a pull in my hamstrings as well as an activation of my glutes. That micro bend we talked about before. So with locking the legs out, you put a lot more pressure on the joint itself. Having a little bit of free range of motion, so just bouncing a little bit, ensures that you have that little bit of a bend in your body overall. Okay, now we talk about lunges. Lunges are important because they work on balance. They're also a way to challenge yourself as well as making sure that the hips are staying nice and even. So if you notice one hip is elevated the entire time, we want to make sure on evening ourselves out. That way we're going to be minimizing the amount of pressure put on our hips, knees, and ankles. So mini lunges, same thing as those squats we were talking about. We're not going all the way to 90, but if I have my legs staggered a little bit, in this case my right leg is forward, left leg is back, and the back is nice and straight the entire time. Sometimes with lunges, I'll see this where people are going way too far forward, or I'll see this where they're trying to lean forward with their back. Okay, so back is completely straight, shoulders back and down like we just talked about, and it's just a little lunge. So we're just going down and up together. With a regular lunge, same thing, except we're going down to 90, but we want to avoid our one leg. So in this case, if my right leg is forward, we want to avoid that left leg actually touching down towards the mat. Okay, so you want to go down just enough so that we're not touching the mat and then come back up together. Again, making sure that we're breathing the entire time and making sure that we're staying nice and stationary. We want to avoid kind of rocking back and forth. Otherwise, we run the risk of injury in our ankles because we have an unstable surface. Okay? So if we were doing regular lunges, going down together, up together. Back is nice and straight. Hips are nice and even the entire time. And we're not going back and forth. We're staying nice and even as we go down and up together. All right. So with that, we just did a whole routine where you can do a standing glute-specific exercise routine. So each one of those exercises, I typically do 2 sets of 5 or 2 sets of 10, something like that. If you want to start off super simple, 1 set of 5 per leg. So if you were doing the lunges, you can do it per leg. If you were doing a squat where you're actually doing the exercise together, try doing a set of 10 and just adding maybe 1 or 2, building up to your normal routine. As we transfer down to the mat here, so we're going to go over a few exercises. We got spinal balance, which we're going to talk about. Leg circles, going clockwise as well as counterclockwise. And then we're going to go over fire hydrants and bridges, option to butterfly. So spinal balance is an important exercise. Like I said, in physical therapy, sometimes they call them bird dogs. Whatever you call them, perfectly fine, as long as you make sure that your core is activated the entire time. Core is very important with these exercises because if your core is out of whack, you're going to notice yourself kind of teeter-tottering, almost as if you were on a boat the entire time, and you're not going to be activating the muscles properly, or you're going to be able to go over and it's not going to be comfortable. With these mat exercises, some of the questions I get is, well, my wrist hurts, I can't put a lot of pressure on it. 2 things you can do. Fist for wrist, so you can actually use your fist instead of putting pressure on your carpal bones, which are your wrist bones. And by doing that, it's going to lessen the pressure overall on your wrist. Another thing you can do, and it's a webbing technique. I learned this whenever I started doing yoga. Instead of putting pressure always on the palm of your hand, try putting pressure on your thumb, index finger, and pinky. And by doing that, it disperses the force a little bit more, eliminating that pressure on the palm and putting it to where it's supposed to be. The other thing to remember during this is whenever you're doing floor exercises, keeping the arms as close to the body as humanly possible is the best thing for it. Once you start getting out here, you're putting a lot of pressure sometimes, depending on the exercises you're doing, on your shoulder, your rotator cuff, everything is not going to be activating the way it's supposed to. And you're actually going to find you're going to be a little bit wobbly versus keeping things nice and close to the body keeps it nice and stable. Okay, so a couple little tidbits there for you. As we're going through spinal balance, you want to make sure that we're stacking the joints. So stacking the joints means that my knees are right under my hips and my wrists are right under my shoulders. Okay, so in this case, this is called a quadruped or 4-point position. And my back is nice and flat the entire time. We don't want to have a dip or we don't want to arch yet, almost as if we were doing cat-cows with yoga. So with spinal balance, we're going to be straight the entire time with our spine, and we're going to have that X pattern that we talked about before. So if I'm activating my right leg, my left arm is going to be going up. If it's a little bit too difficult for you, just try to do one of the legs for now, keeping the shoulders nice and stable. You can definitely incorporate that later in your routine. Okay, so we have our 4-point position, shoulder width apart the entire time, and we're going to lift straight out as if I was pushing against, so right here I have a table, imagining I'm pushing myself against that table, as well as lifting out with my right or my left arm and putting it back. Same thing, opposites. And why this is important is it teaches your core how to stay nice and stable as well as activating the glutes. And so by having that core stability, we're teaching our core to stay nice and stable as we're going through and doing these movements. So that way, whenever we do exercises that incorporate that core work, we're gonna have that foundation already, which is gonna be nice and solid. Okay, so with those ones, I typically either set a counter or I do 1 set of 10. So as we go through, 1, 2, all the way to 10. All right, leg circles. So same thing, that quadruped position. If we are uncomfortable with the quadruped position, you can definitely put a chair and just extend your hips a little bit and then do the leg circles. That way you don't have to be down on the floor. Nice little alternative as well. So if we were doing this, remember we could always use fists for wrists as well. Just extending the leg and little circles. And what this is doing is it's activating several muscles in one setting. So we actually have our hamstrings as well as our glutes working at the same time, and it's creating this little circling effect. So as we're doing this, setting a timer for about 30 seconds, you can start off with 10. Sometimes 10 seconds is all it takes to just get those muscles nice and fired up. But then increasing by a few seconds each time you try it, doing counterclockwise and then clockwise, making sure the circles aren't super, super big. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself weeble wobbling, just like we talked about we want to avoid. By doing it nice and stable in those little circles, you're actually concentrating on a lot more control, which is going to be key. Okay, so as we're doing these, making sure we have a nice flat back, so we're not dipping or doing anything crazy. Our spine is nice and stable, and then we're doing the circles. Okay, making sure we don't go above the hips in that case. If we go above the hips, we're actually going to put a lot of pressure on our sacrum. We want to avoid that. All right, fire hydrants. So fire hydrants are an interesting one because they basically are what they sound like. You're going to be lifting your leg and closing it back in. Some people have another name for them. I just call them what I usually do in the clinic. So same thing, quadruped position. I'm going to turn myself a little bit so you can see this. And we're going to have a nice flat spine. So we're not dipping or doing anything crazy with this one. Our core is activated as well as our shoulders are rounded and squeezed together. So we don't want to have our shoulders protruding. We want to have a nice flat spine the entire time. And what we're going to do is we're going to have our leg bent and we're just going to lift and lower. And what we want to avoid is opening ourselves up completely by doing that. So what we want to do is we want to make sure our nice quadruped position stays. So we're either looking down or straight ahead of us and just lifting and lowering. Doing a nice 2-4 count with these ones are going to be good. So that means that we're lifting 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. That way you get a nice concentric and eccentric contraction going with. Gets you a little bit more bang for your buck, and your muscles are going to retain that strength, which is going to be key. All right, last exercise we're going to talk about for the day are bridges. Bridges are important because they help activate several muscle groups at once. You get the lower portion of your core, you get your hamstrings, you get your glutes. Everything's kind of firing simultaneously, which makes it a little bit more complex of an exercise than just lifting your hips up towards the ceiling. You want to make sure first and foremost you have that foundation. So nice flat back the entire time. I'm going to show you a trick on how to do that. So if I am laying down, I want to make sure my back is nice and flat. The way I do that is if I take my hand and I can fit it behind my lower spine, my back isn't completely flat. So all I do in that case, if that is the case, I just tuck my hips under a little bit, then I can't get my hand behind my back, okay? Legs nice and shoulder width apart the entire time. So with this one, you want to make sure that we're not putting the knees together. Otherwise, we're putting a decent amount of pressure on the inside of our legs. We want to avoid that. So shoulder width apart the entire time. And then all we're going to do is we have that nice foundation. Our back is nice and flat. We're going to imagine lifting our hips up towards the ceiling, but activating our glutes while doing it. So a nice key way to do this is if I'm pushing my heels into the floor to lift myself up. Okay, so I'm gonna show you how to do that. Arms nice and by your side, so it's gonna help you keep that position. And then we're pushing our heels in towards the floor as we raise up towards the ceiling with the hips. Hips are staying nice and even the entire time. And then if we want to butterfly, we open ourselves up, close, and then lower. A nice way to make sure that you're not holding your breath with this one is if you can swallow. If you can swallow, that means you're not tucking your chin in towards your chest, and it helps open your airways a little bit more. Sometimes if you try to go really high, you're kind of pushing yourself all together, and it makes it a little bit harder to breathe. So we want to avoid that by any means. Okay, so one more time. Nice and by your side. Hips up towards the ceiling, nice and even. If we want a butterfly, we option 2 do that, and then lowering ourselves down nice and good. With those types of exercises, as well as the fire hydrants, one set of 10, one set of 20 is gonna be your key with that one. It's more about control with it overall. And by the option to butterfly it, you're actually doing a little bit of that fire hydrant routine as well, except you're not going against gravity. So with the fire hydrants, you're going against gravity. With the butterflying effect, you're actually opening yourselves with gravity. So it's gonna be a little bit different. Same maneuver, it's just with versus without gravity. Okay. So I hope you guys enjoyed this exercise video. I love doing these, and I love being able to educate everybody on why their fitness routine should be the way it is, as well as the different things that can make it a little bit more dynamic and get you the best exercises for your buck, as well as your time. So with these, very, very little. I think overall we did 11 exercises. Maybe takes you about a half hour, 45 minutes, and you can definitely incorporate them into your routine as much as possible. Again, options to utilize stairs, chair, whatever you have on hand, so that way it makes it a little bit more user-friendly. Okay, so the next video we are going to do, take a look at, is going to be on, I think it's June 17th. We're going to be talking about the core. So Core 101 is what we're going to be doing, and I hope to see you all then. Have a great weekend, and I look forward to seeing you all in the future.